Go.
This is a post-Memorial Day veteran story. Memorial Day was first celebrated to remember those who lost their lives in the Civil War. Memorial Day today matters because we honor those in the military who lost their lives so that we live in a free nation. Also, God honors those men and women who have served in defense of our country and who are remembered by their family and friends. That is why I want to share with you a special story of a former Marine friend who served in North Korea and was a good Samaritan. A good Samaritan of a special kind who is now in his heavenly home. This veteran story, yes, is about a good friend of mine, and he was a member of the Oakton and Red Valley United Methodist Churches. Many of you may know him. This is a story about Frank Hackett, who told me, once a Marine, always a Marine. I learned of how Frank was a good Samaritan in North Korea in 1950 when he was 18 years old. What were you doing at age 18? Frank was reluctant to tell me how he was a member of the chosen few as he battled the North Koreans and then the Chinese soldiers. As we worked together on re-roofing my horse barn and building a shed, Frank slowly opened up his life in the Marines to me. So this Good Samaritan story touched my heart, and I'm sure it will touch yours. In fact, it may be the only such story in the Marines or the Army that took place on a battlefield. We all know the Good Samaritan story in the Bible, and Frank showed me how it relates to life in the battlefield in North Korea and how it should relate to our lives today. The term Good Samaritan refers to a person who has helped others in a random act of kindness. In the story told by Jesus, a Jew was robbed, wounded, and left to die by his assailants. Two highly respected men walked by, and then a Samaritan came along, tended to the Jew's wounds, and brought him to an inn to be taken care of so that he would survive. What makes Jesus' story so compelling is that Jews and Samaritans basically hated each other. What makes Frank's story so compelling is that Frank knew that no one else was going to help a wounded dog on the battlefield. Woof. Frank couldn't ignore the whimpering of the dog as he was on patrol with other Marines. When Frank told them to wait while he looked at the dog, they said, "Frank, it's only a dog. It's going to die." Frank said, No, cover for me while I see what I can do for the dog." Think of what must have went through Frank's mind at that time. So he should be seeing someone who needs help. Having the intent to help is good, but acting on that intent is more important. And it was important to Frank. So, put on your combat boots and walk alongside Frank as he ambles across the muddy field to the dog lying on its side and whimpering. Frank comes to the dog, kneels down in the mud, pets the dog head, and says, "I'm your pal, and I want to see if I can help you." The dog licked Frank's hand and knew this man was a friend. Frank saw blood over the dog's stomach and a gash with a small portion of the dog's inside poking out. Frank said to himself, "What are my options?" This is another true story of knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Knowledge. Frank knew that the dog was severely wounded. Understanding. Frank thought of three options that he had at that time. One, he could get up and join his fellow Marines on patrol and leave the dog to die. Two, since there was no vet or vet hospital, he could take his rifle and shoot the dog in the head and put it out of its misery. Frank thought about what the other Marine said. "Frank, it's only a dog and we're on patrol." Three, he could see if he could tend to the wounded dog. But how? Wisdom. Frank just knew he had to try and help and save the dog. He called to the other Marines to cover for him. Frank then talked soothingly to the dog, took his canteen of water and handkerchief, and washed away the blood to get a closer look at the wound. He then took out his small medical kit, took out antibiotic powder, and put it on the wound. Then Frank took the needle and thread in his kit to sew up the wound and at the same time pushing a little bit of the insides back in. He told the dog, his pal, this might hurt. But the dog lay quietly and didn't move or whimper as Frank sewed up the wound. Then what could Frank do after he sewed up the wound? He called to his fellow Marines to again cover for him as he was going to take the dog back to camp. They couldn't believe what Frank was doing for a dumb dog. I told Frank that I thought God was in charge of what he was doing. This later turned out to be true. That dog would not leave Frank's side, and as it turned out, Pal saved Frank's life. You're no doubt saying, how could that be? You should know that Frank was in the 1st Marine Division and fighting the North Koreans and then the Chinese near the border of North Korea and China. As the Chinese soldiers crossed the border into North Korea, the Marine and Army troops fell back to regroup. Frank said to his close buddy, "Let's make a 2-person foxhole so we can look out for each other. One of us can nap and the other can be on the lookout." It was a bright moonlit night and Frank was napping with Pal by his leg. Frank awoke as Pal growled quietly. But Frank also felt that low growl on his leg. He opened his eyes and saw his buddy was fast asleep. He looked up at the full, bright moon and then a person coming to look in the foxhole. It looked like a Chinese soldier. Frank took his loaded rifle and quickly ended the life of the enemy soldier. He patted Pal, and his buddy came awake when Frank shot his rifle. He told his buddy to go back and tell the camp captain what had happened. This action took place in either late October or early November 1950, and eventually resulted in both the Marines and the Army continuing to fall back and head for Busan to be loaded on ships to leave North Korea. Frank didn't want to leave his dog, his pal, in North Korea. When they got to Busan to get on an LST ship, Frank had his buddy distract the sailor at the gangway. Frank put Pal under his greatcoat and walked onto the LST. Off they sailed to Japan, and Frank walked off the ship in Japan with his pal who saved his life. Yes, Frank saved the dog's life, and in return, pal saved Frank's life. That is why I say that God was in charge of Frank being a good Samaritan, and then the dog in turn saving Frank's life. Frank had to leave Pal in Japan, but he made sure the Marine unit would adopt him. Frank gave Pal a great hug, shed a tear, and then boarded a ship and headed home to go and leave to South Philadelphia. In his Marine service, Frank received several Purple Heart medals, the Silver Star, and also the Legion of Merit medals. One other thing about this story. If Frank and the dog had not been good Samaritans, then Frank would not have met and married Diana, and they in turn would have their two wonderful children, Jefferson and Laura. To God be the glory. Next 2 weeks will be Father's Day stories. God bless you and have a good week.